All right, good morning, everybody. I may or may not have just seen someone yawn. So let's do this real quick. Arms up. Arms out. All right. No way you'll fall asleep now after that stretching exercise. No way. I don't know if this has ever happened to you where you've been accused of something that you were actually innocent of. But everyone assumed that you were guilty. No proof, no evidence, but they know you, and that's just the kind of thing you would do. And so they assumed it was you, but it wasn't. So I have a funny story from my childhood, and I don't know why I remember this because it's completely not important, but it's kind of funny. When I was a little kid, probably about my youngest daughter's age, my dad comes home from work and he sees a white rag in our yard. And he is extremely angry with me because why was I playing with his work rags in the yard? And which I was like, well, that's a really good question. I have no idea why I'd want to play with work rags in the yard. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. That's not fun. He was convinced that I had done it, and it took my mom to convince him that, well, your son would not play with a white rag, one of your work rags, in the yard. It was probably the dog. But my father was convinced it was me for a long time. It took a lot of convincing for him to realize that maybe playing with rags isn't the funnest thing for an 11-year-old boy to be doing. I don't know if you've ever had something like that. This is actually such a popular topic that I don't know if you get into Netflix documentaries or not. For a while during the pandemic, I would just sit down and watch documentary after documentary, because once you watch one, well, then they start hitting you with all of the recommendations. Watch this one, and there's all of these documentaries about people that have been accused and convicted of things, and it turns out they didn't do it. And organizations have been formed in order to defend people who were accused and maybe even found guilty of something that they did not actually do. So this morning, in our Overlooked series, we're going to look at the story of Balaam. Now, you may, and this one's overlooked, but I think it's maybe overlooked because maybe we don't quite see it for what it really is. Our minds have already been informed. If you grew up in church and you're like, I know who Balaam is, he's like a scoundrel. He's like one of the worst people ever. When you read the story of Balaam, you don't really think of him or see him as the story is told because your mind's already been shifted one direction, and so you have a hard time seeing it a different way. So I'm going to look at the story of Balaam. It's a long story. It covers 3 chapters and some various verses throughout the rest of the Old Testament and New Testament. We're going to look at basically all of it. But unlike Absalom, where I stretched one sermon into 4, we will do it in one sermon. It's just going to take us a very long time. And that's okay, because do you want to be out there or in here? That's right. Captive audience. The heat alone is saying, just keep on preaching, preacher. Just keep on preaching. So let's see some things that are said about Balaam in the New Testament. Most of us are more familiar with the New Testament than the Old Testament. So let's see some of these passages that maybe we're familiar with as we think about Balaam. Now, Peter is here talking about false prophets. So that might already give us an indication as to who perhaps Balaam is. He's talking about all these false prophets that have infiltrated the church. So he says, but there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. So he's well, in the past we had false prophets, and should be expected that we'll have false teachers today. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with fabricated stories. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping. So whatever's going to happen to these false teachers that Peter's talking about, it's not good. Right? He does not think like, well, maybe they're just a little misguided. No, he's calling them out for what he sees them as completely false teachers, and they know they're false teachers. They're not just misunderstanding something. He knows that these teachers, they're deliberately lying. They are deliberately lying to you. They will be paid back with harm for the harm they have done. Their idea of pleasure is to carouse in broad daylight. Their blots and blemishes, reveling in their pleasures while they feast with you. In other words, right there at church. It's like they're right here in your church. With eyes full of adultery, they never stop sinning. They seduce the unstable. They are experts in greed and a cursed brood. They have left the straight way and wandered off to follow the way of Balaam, son of Bezer. Now, if you're familiar with Bezer, I thought it was Beor. Same difference. It's Greek versus Hebrew. They follow the way of Balaam. That's our guy. Who loved the wages of wickedness. Okay, so we got some idea who Balaam is. He's a false prophet, apparently, who loves making money off of his lies. That's what it's looking like, right? But he was rebuked for his wrongdoing by a donkey. Now, this is the part you're probably most familiar with. An animal without speech, who spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. So apparently this prophet is on his way to go make money with his lies, but if it weren't for his donkey talking to him, he would have done it, but he was restrained. His madness was restrained. Jude. Dear friends, I'll tell you which chapter of Jude, but there's only one. Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. Sounds very familiar. They are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. Woe to them! They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. Now, he makes three references to different stories there. Story of Cain, you're probably familiar. Story of Balaam, if you're not, you're about to be. And the story of Korah, which we've not actually gone over in sermons, but you may know something about that in the book of Numbers. Jude says, these false prophets have gone the way of Cain, they've gone the way of Balaam, they've gone the way of Korah. Okay. None of which are good. Are you getting any warm and fuzzy feelings about Balaam yet? Not yet. Not yet. Okay. Revelation chapter 2. To the angel of the church in Pergamum I write, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Okay. Still not a very pleasant individual. So what do we know about Balaam so far? He speaks lies. He is a liar. Right? Because he is a false prophet. He has to be a liar. What else do we know? He is motivated by greed, not just greed for money, but also sexual greed, because he's enticing, he's teaching them to want to have sexual morality with these other people, right? So he's motivated by greed. So whatever we're going to find out about him is that he will do almost anything for money. That's what we're going to find out, right? Number 3, he hates the people of God. That's why he was teaching the Moabites and the Midianites to entice the Israelites so they would fall into sin, because he really, really doesn't like the people of God, as would be all false prophets, trying to lead the people astray because they are not fond of them. He is a tempter like Satan because of the story I just referenced, right? In other words, he is the worst person to ever walk on the planet Earth. Now, you might think Judas runs kind of really close to him, maybe close second, or maybe they're head to head here. But you get the very good sense about Balaam that whatever happened to Balaam and whatever he did, it must have been some of the worst stuff you've ever read about in your entire life. Now, for those of you who have been worshiping with us for a while, you already know that I'm being a little bit sarcastic through all of this. And if you don't know that yet, you're about to find out, because we're going to read the story of Balaam. You have been warned in the beginning, it's long, but the air conditioners will run all day long. Let's look at blaming Balaam. Numbers chapter 22. The fact that it's in the book of Numbers is probably a reason that you've never looked at it. It starts off with 5 chapters of nothing but numbers. No, thank you. But if you keep on going, you're going to find some really good stories. Now, Numbers chapter 22, obviously the Israelites have left Egypt. They've been taking their sweet old time, getting through the wilderness, trying to get to the promised land. And they've already gone through the land of the Amorites, and they've defeated them. And now they've come to the land of Moab. It says, Then the people of Israel set out and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was in great dread of the people, because they were many. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. Now, when you read the book of Numbers, you find out there's about 2 million people headed their way. Actually, camping out near Jericho. Now, you might think, 2 million, that sounds like an exaggeration. It probably is. But it's a good way of saying a whole lot of people. There's a lot of people. The king of Moab, Balak, he sees them and he says, I don't know what we're going to do, guys. Look what they did to the Amorites. We got no chance. They're going to kill us all. So they're all scared. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, now Moab's a land a little bit further north. Midian's a land not real close to Moab, but somehow they've joined forces and they've come together against the Israelites. He says, This horde will now look up all that is around us, as the ox looks up the grass of the field. So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river, which is the Euphrates River, in the land of the people of Ammon, which is just the land of his people. Call to him, and he says, now, just a little side note, Balaam is one of those characters that we actually find outside of Scripture. There's actually an inscription found. It's called Balaam, son of Beor, at Pethor. And it talks about some of the stuff that he had done. So Balaam is a very well-known guy. You don't get inscriptions in the ancient world for nothing. Very well-known guy. They call on that guy. So he's calling in the best of the best. Because when you've got 2 million people staring you down, you need the best of the best to come and save you. So send for Balaam. It says, Behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are dwelling opposite me. Actually, cover the face of the earth. It's the same word that's used with the locusts and the plague. And they're like a plague among us, and they are dwelling opposite me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. In other words, Balaam, come and curse these 2 million people for me, because if you don't, there's no way I can win. You're putting a whole lot of faith in a verbal pronouncement. That is what a curse is. When someone stands up and says, I curse you, and they give a list of things that they say are going to happen to you, you're putting a whole lot of faith into a verbal pronouncement when that's what your plan is. Come and say bad things over them, that those bad things may happen to them, and we may win. That's what his plan is. Solid plan. Solid plan. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the fees for divination in their hands. In other words, this is a paying gig. They're not going to have them, curse people for free. You got to pay for that kind of thing. And they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message, and he said to them, Lodge here tonight, and I will bring back word to you as the Lord. Now the word Lord there is Yahweh. Well, I thought Balaam was a false prophet. But he says, I'm going to speak to Yahweh on your behalf. And I will tell you what the Lord says to me. So the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. And God came to Balaam and said, Who are these men with you? And Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent to me, saying, Behold, a people has come out of Egypt, and it covers the face of the earth. Now come, curse them for me. Perhaps I shall be able to fight against them and drive them out. So we see this false prophet in a conversation with God. And it's interesting when they say, come and curse them. He doesn't say, well, let me talk to Baal about this. See what Baal has to say. Let me talk to Chemosh and see what Chemosh has to say. Or Molech. No, he says, let me talk to Yahweh. That's peculiar, right? Interesting. And then God shows up and talks to him. God said to Balaam, you shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the princes of Balak, go to your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. Now, if this is starting to sound a little bit out of character for Balaam, given what we've read previous, you're correct. You would think he would say, listen, God told me not to go, but I saw what you guys are willing to pay me, and you better believe I'm going. Going to get me some of that, right? But he says, no, go back. God doesn't want me to go with you, so I'm not going to go. So the princes of Moab rose and went to Balak and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. So once again, Balak sends princes, more in number and more honorable than these. So he says, okay, I need to up the ante. I got to send even higher level officials. That will convince him. And they came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, son of Zippor, let nothing hinder you from coming to me, for I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me, I will do. Come, curse this people for me. In other words, ask of me whatever you want. Just come. Just come. But Balaam answered and said to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord my God to do less or more. So you too, please, stay here tonight, that I may know more, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. And God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men have come to call you, rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you. So Balaam rose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the princes of Moab. Are you following the story along so far? So far, so good. Have you found where he's a terrible guy? Yeah, now this problem that I'm presenting you with this morning, I didn't find this on my own, right? I didn't look at this and say, I think I'm the first one to ever see the discrepancy. No. Been around for a long time. Ancient Jews before the time of Jesus, they didn't know what to do with Balaam. Some said he was a good guy. Some said he was a bad guy. Josephus talks about him. Philo talks about him. A lot of people talk about Balaam. They don't know what to do with him. Because it looks like they're supposed to really, really dislike the guy based on the first passages we read. But when you dig in, it's a little different. All right, back to the story. Balaam has got permission to go, but God says, okay, go. But only do what I tell you to do and only say what I tell you to say. So he goes. Now this next verse will also confuse you. But God's anger was kindled because he went. How can you be angry at someone that you told them they could go? That would be like if my son Caden said, Dad, can I go play basketball with my friends? And I said, no, now's not a very good time. And he says, are you sure? Their parents actually texted this time and said, they really want me to go and play. And I said, okay, yeah, you can go and play basketball with your friends. And the moment he walks out the door, I'm like, I am so mad that he left. Well, then I should have let him go. So it's a little confusing to why God would say, yes, please, go. In the very next verse, I am so mad that he went. So let's keep reading, see if we can figure this thing out. But God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as his adversary. Now he was riding on the donkey, and his two servants were with him. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, and the donkey turned aside out of the road and went into the field. But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her onto the road, which is, of course, we look at that, we're like, he struck his animal. If you've ever ridden animals, you often do find yourself having to give him a little smack to get him to go this way or that way, or to move forward instead of backwards, or to get up instead of lay down. It's fairly normal. He gets a little agitated later on. Then the angel of the Lord stood in the narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed against the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck her again. Okay. Then the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled. That's the second time we've seen that. And he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times? If you thought the story wasn't confusing enough already. Now we got talking animals involved. God's mad because Balaam did what he said he could do. Now animals are talking to him. Just listen to the story. Not this total side note, not everything in the Bible has to have historicity for it to mean something to you. If you don't know what I mean by that, see me after church. So the donkey says, what have I ever done to you that you keep striking me? Because Balaam doesn't know the donkey's saving him. All he knows is you keep going into the field, you're brushing me up against walls, you're laying down on the job. What is wrong with my donkey? And Balaam said to the donkey, because this is normal, why are you talking? No, that's not what he says. He says, because you have made a fool of me. Like talking to an animal isn't foolish? Okay. Because you made a fool of me. Remember, he has his servants with him. He's like, you keep going this way and that way, and now you're laying down. I look like an idiot. All because of you, donkey. He says, I wish I had a sword in my hand, for then I would kill you. He doesn't know that the angel of the Lord has a sword in his hand. And he doesn't know that the anger of the Lord is kindled against him because his anger is now kindled against his donkey, right? There's parallels here. And the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life long to this day? Ridden all your life long to this day. Is it my habit to treat you this way? And he said, well, no, right? This is the first time you've ever acted like this. To which you say, well, maybe there's something to it then, right? Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in his way with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed down and fell on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary to you, because your way is perverse before me. And now we go, yes! His way is perverse. That's why God's anger is kindled against him. And that's why everyone talks about how bad Balaam is, because his way is perverse. Slow down. No one has any idea what the word perverse means in Hebrew. They just translated a word they don't know into perverse because they don't know what to do with it. It's used elsewhere to talk about the tossing waves of an ocean. Is that perverse? Those perverse waves of the ocean? Probably what it means is you're on a dangerous path. And this whole episode with the donkey and the swords and the anger is meant to serve Balaam as a warning, which is to say, Balaam, I know you said you wouldn't take even a household of gold or a household of silver when you get there, but when you get there and you see a house full of gold and silver, you might change your mind. Right? It's one thing to say from 100 miles away, oh, I would never accept that. I'll give you $1 million to do that. I would never do that for $1 million. What about if it's filled in a suitcase and it's right in front of your face? It's a little different now. I believe this is God's way of telling Balaam, I know what you've said, but you're about to be face to face with temptation. And you might change your mind. Don't. This is a dangerous path you're on. I'm glad everyone agrees with me. Let's move on. The donkey saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let her live. Then Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the road against me. Now, therefore, if it is evil in your sight, I will turn back. In other words, hey, if you don't want me to go, I won't go. I'll go back. And the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only the word that I tell you. In other words, don't get there and fall into the temptation of saying something other than what I say. Don't get there and say, I really want to curse him because, man, look at that money. Don't do it. I'm watching. I'm watching you. So Balaam went on with the princes of Balak. Now, I'm going to start reading just sections of the next couple chapters. So Balaam goes with Balak, and he sees just a portion of Israel. And Balak says, curse him, Balaam, curse him, curse him. They do some sacrifices and stuff like that. Curse him now, curse him. So then Balaam took up his discourse and said, from Aram Balak has brought me, the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced. It seems like he just keeps saying what God tells him to say. So they go to another spot and they try it all over again. Now, this might sound weird to you, because what's the difference? If he's not going to curse him from this spot, this geographic location, then why would he curse him from this geographic location? Because the way their brains worked was there were certain gods in certain areas, and even the same god might have houses in different areas, and so the god by the same name in that house over there might do something different. So let's try it here. Didn't work. Let's try it over here. And Balaam took up his discourse and said, "Rise, Balak, and hear. Give ear to me, O son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind." In other words, nothing's changed. You brought me to a new location. We had some good sacrificial food, but nothing has changed. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken and will not fulfill it? Behold, I received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot revoke it. When Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to look for omens, but set his face toward the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camping tribe by tribe. Now we know from the book of Numbers that the way they worked, they had the tabernacle in the center, and then the tribes would encircle that tabernacle. It's like circles. Yeah, it's just like circles. We want to find another fancy word for that. But they form circles around the tabernacle. And that's what he sees. He sees them encircling the tabernacle. And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camping tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he took up his discourse and said, "The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with his eyes uncovered. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel. When is he ever going to be a false prophet? Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemies, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly, and one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of the cities." So what exactly did Balaam do wrong? And this is where we have the exciting twist. Speaking of documentaries on Netflix, they always have some sort of twist. You're like, oh, didn't see that coming. This is my twist. You don't have to accept it. You can go back and read it on your own. You come up with your own twist. You can read it a different way. That's totally fine. But this is what I think happened. We'll keep reading in Numbers. This is the very next passage. After Balaam is done cursing all the enemies of God and blessing Israel, it says, when Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. Now remember, it was the Moabites who wanted to curse Israel. They're trying to find a way to defeat Israel. It says, these invited the people to sacrifice. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. So the very next thing that happens, man, if Balak had only known how easy it was. The very next thing that happens, the Israelites start worshiping other gods, start joining themselves to the women of Moab, and they lose their way. They didn't need a curse. But it happened at Moab, at Peor. And that is where Balaam is from. Numbers 31. The Lord said to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites. Now remember, the Midianites had joined forces with the Moabites for the Israelites. After that, you'll be gathered to your people. In other words, Moses, you're about to die. So Moses said to the people, arm some of your men to go to war against the Midianites so they may carry out the Lord's vengeance on them. They fought against Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses and killed every man. You have allowed all the women to live, he asked them. Now we've looked at this passage before. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that the plague struck the Lord's people. Now, I don't know about you, but we read pretty much everything about Balaam. And I never read that. I don't remember ever reading a part where Balaam went and said, okay, I couldn't curse them, but here's what we're going to do, folks. Men are silly. And all you got to do is get your women to entice the men, and it's over for them. Now that's true. But I don't see where Balaam did that. But Moses blamed him for that. Because it's easy to blame Balaam for our bad behavior. See, I think this is where the rubber meets the road. If you thought, well, how did Balaam get such a bad reputation? Well, because Moses began to say things like, and they did, they killed Balaam, they struck him down with a sword. He began to say things like, that was Balaam's fault. Remember Balaam? We need to kill Balaam because he convinced Balak to use the women to entice our men. It's all a little convoluted, is it not? Again, this is my twist. You don't have to accept it. I think Balaam was basically a scapegoat. To the point where he began to represent all that was wrong with false prophets. Because when you read the story, he says, he's the Lord, he's Yahweh, my God. And I will only do what he says to do. I won't accept any money. He never did accept any money for anything. But he got blamed for something that other people did. Guilty until proven innocent. And that's kind of what we like to do too. We like to blame other people and outside things for our own choices. Let me say this even more strongly. Let's say Balaam did do that. Let's say Balaam actually did go to Balak and say, here's what you got to do. I can't curse him because God told me not to curse him, but here's what we're going to do to bring him down. Those men are still responsible for their own decisions. They didn't want to go, I don't know what's going on. I guess I just got to be with these Moabite women and worship their gods. I don't know what I'm doing. We're responsible for our own actions. And you can blame Balaam if you want to. And here I'm using Balaam, he's a metaphor for anything that you want to blame for your own actions. But it was still your choice. And it's still what you did. And it's hard to escape that. I mean, I do this, I'm sure some of you do this too, where you find yourself needing to apologize, but you throw the word but into the apology. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that, but. Oh, here comes Balaam. On his donkey. We need to accept responsibility for the things that we do. Because those are our decisions. That's what we decided. And it doesn't mean there aren't external forces putting pressure on you, but at the end of the day, you have to do what you know is right. And when you do what is wrong, it's not fair to say it's all that influence's fault. It's not to say they didn't play a role, but you have some culpability in that too. Because you're the one that decided to do it. Or say it. Or act that way. Or be that way. When I read the story of Balaam, one, it's an interesting story. I can tell because only one of you fell asleep. The story is very intricate, very complex. I love being able to juxtaposition the two things we read about in the New Testament, things we read about the Old Testament. But I also connect with it. Not the talking animal part, although I do firmly believe my dog wants to talk. but with a very human aspect of who we are as people. And when we all rush in together and we do something wrong and we want to say, oh, it's not our fault. Kill Balaam. Strike him down with a sword. This is vengeance on the Midianites for what they did to us. Let's be responsible for who we are and the actions we take and the decisions we make. Amen? Amen. Let's stand up and sing one more song.